From the ideation of a painting, passing through the preparatory drawing until the very last touches of a painting, in this video I'm gonna share with you the whole process. Hey there, I'm Katerina. I put my corporate career on hold, I hope forever, and I joined an art academy at 30, beginning from absolute zero. Here I share my artistic journey, my real challenges, breakthroughs, and lessons I learned along the way. Welcome to my channel. After sharing so much about my paintings in the academic vlogs that you might have seen from the past academic year, I decided to do a whole video where I only share the process step by step that I used to make this painting, going from the ideation, the preparatory drawing, the grisaille, and every step that's in between before finishing a painting. It's the process we're learning at the Academy, mainly from our art director Nicola Verlato, who's a huge exponent of figurative art in the contemporary art world. I feel very lucky to be learning from him. He's teaching us to paint in thin layers, strongly grounding his technique and his teaching in the old masters from the Renaissance. This one was my first original painting and one where I followed all the steps recommended by the Academy and by him. I would say that my artistic journey is only at its beginning and I still don't know if I'm gonna follow all the same steps for my next paintings or if I'm gonna go towards a completely different direction. I guess you'll see in future vlogs. But one thing I know is that following all the steps was extremely useful and I learned a lot. I hope this video is gonna be useful for you too, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the comments. Also feel free to go back to my academic vlogs to see more in depth what I was doing, what I was thinking while following step by step the whole process. And if you're not interested in some of the steps, feel free to skip them in the chapters below. And now we can begin. Before starting my painting, I kind of already had in mind the topic I wanted to tackle with this painting, but also with future paintings too. I think for artists it's extremely useful to develop a concept or a series where you can really show what you have to say. And it also helps to delineate your artistic identity and your artistic research. In my case, I still think a lot about the dichotomy of 9 to 5 versus following your passion, and how society is really split between these two things. If you've been following me, you might know that at 30 I decided to live my corporate life and follow my instincts, start an art academy from absolute zero. And I must say that it was the best decision ever, the ones that bring me the most joy. So it's a topic that resonates with me a lot. But what about the composition of the painting? Well, that actually comes from a painting that I've seen during my trip to Rome in January, when I saw a painting by Giorgione whose name Double Portrait or Two Friends. However, when I saw it the first time, I thought that it had nothing to do with two friends. What I saw was mainly the background figure who was judging the foreground figure, kind of the same way I feel about my two personalities. You know, the figure behind who's dressed in corporate is actually my corporate side, the stricter side of me, the one who's judging and looking and saying, what are you doing with your life? Why are you choosing this insecure path? While the figure in the foreground is actually my current me, the one who's trying to relax a bit, looking at the future in a hopeful way, trying not to have everything under her control, abandoning herself to the flow of things. The original character by Giorgione had a fruit in his hand. However, for me, the choice to substitute the fruit and to put the tarot was quite immediate. It was an idea that came instantly and I didn't want to think twice about that. I love that choice. I love the choice of putting the Fool as a card that you can see in the painting. And actually often the ideas of painting come just like this. They come out of a moment of inspiration. It's just something that we need to be very ready to listen. And in fact, when I have an idea, I normally sketch it immediately. Or if I don't have my sketchbook, I write it down in my notes on my phone just to make sure I don't forget it. And these ideas can already be quite similar to the final painting, or they can evolve a lot in time. Now that I had my idea ready, I asked my friends and teachers of the Academy for help. And since I was gonna be photographed and couldn't control how the picture was being taken, I briefed them super carefully on what needed to be there. In my case, the same exact shadows and lights as in the original painting. The briefing part is super important to avoid losing time and make sure to have clear ideas on what you want, so I'd recommend to never skip this step. However, I had to book another shooting afternoon since on the spot I didn't notice there were some details not working the way I wanted, which I only noticed when I downloaded the pictures on the computer. So, big learning and recommendation, bring a laptop during your shooting and make sure to examine pictures before declaring the shooting done. But in any case, worst come to worst, you can always take them again as I did. Once I chose the final pictures, I post-produced them very easily through Procreate. You can obviously use Photoshop or any other software depending on what you need or if you need it. Look how precise my reference came out, I'm so proud of it. Once the final reference was okay, I placed the grid on it with Procreate. I got the proportions and based on that, I decided the measures of my drawing that would have later become my future painting. For me, it was important that my portrait was close to my real life size, so that was the criteria I used. I used the grid to make my drawing as precise as possible versus the original photo. I wouldn't say it is absolutely necessary, you can obviously copy your reference by freehand, but it depends on how precise you want your drawing to be. All masters use the grid too, we see that a lot in David for example, which as you might know, I love. The grid does leave a little bit of space to mistakes, but oh well, that's art, not AI. But also, I really don't like the idea of using projectors because it takes away those little imprecisions that might make our work of art unique. For my preparatory drawing, I used Fusain and Conté Pierre Noir. You can honestly do it with whatever material you prefer depending on your goal. I wanted to draw quite freely, as charcoal allows, and do a mix between hatching, tratteggio, and blending, sfumato. I also chose package paper as a surface, which is stone and it gave that nice vintage look. I spent a lot of time on this preparatory drawing and that honestly depends on how much time you want to spend and what your goal is. Obviously, the shadows don't need to be so super refined because you're gonna transfer it anyway, but my goal was to familiarize with what I was gonna paint, and I definitely recommend to put some time into it, especially if you're somehow a beginner. It helps so much and I referred to my drawing several times while painting it, so at least for me, it's definitely time well spent. Once the preparatory drawing is ready, you can transfer it. There are several ways to transfer a drawing. In the Renaissance, for example, they used the spolvero technique, which, if you're interested in, we might talk more in deep in another video. Here I could have put pigment directly behind my drawing and redraw the contours on that, but I wanted to keep this drawing for myself and that's why I decided to use transfer paper, even if it took one extra passage. If you're not attached to your drawings as I am, that will save you some time. And don't underestimate the time it takes to do a transfer, the whole thing took me a whole day at the academy. Once I had the tracing on the transfer paper, I put some red pigment behind and went back to redraw with a pen. It is important to use a pigment with a different color than our pencil, because otherwise you will not be able to see the drawing you just traced. Moreover, on the second passage I used a pen, firstly because it is important to keep the lines thin and precise, while with the pencil you need to sharpen it every 2 seconds. But secondly, you need to distinguish the lines you retraced versus the ones you didn't, and if you use the pencil, that wouldn't be so easy to do. Finally, as you can see, these transfers got lots of lines, and that's the way they encourage us to do it at the academy to make sure to preserve the drawing as much as possible after we start painting. After we fix the transfer with a fixative spray, we can finally start painting. First step, the Grisaille. Also the most important step when you're painting in thin layers. The better you do the Grisaille, and the easier the work is gonna be when you're gonna glaze with colors. The important thing in the Grisaille is not only to distinguish the shadow areas from the light areas, but also to find the geometrical shapes and create volumes. Again, here we're not speaking universal truths, that's just how I learned to do it, one of the 1,000 different ways. As the earliest step, I've been advised to go over all the contours first to make sure that my washes don't hide the transfer. I regret a bit doing this step, firstly because my transfer was very clear underneath, but also because I left some strong marks that later on in the color phase I struggled softening. Then it is important to start with darker masses, so to have the darkest key points on which you can calibrate all the other values. For the Grisaille, we only use turpentine as a medium, or any other type of solvent will do, and as a color we use raw umber, which is very transparent, and when diluted it struggles to become very dark, so I had to go over with more than a passage on the darkest areas. I also used titanium white for the lightest areas and in the transitions between dark and light. I regret not being more precise in my Grisaille, for example in the tarot deck details, because it gave me a little bit of trouble in the color phase that I could have easily avoided with a stronger Grisaille. Grisaille. I'm telling you all this so you can avoid my mistakes. Moreover, some transitions were too strong here. For example, look at the transition between shadow and light in the cheeks of both the figures. I struggled with that too in the color phase. I should have spent more time working on this Grisaille phase without rushing to the color phase. Once the first layer of the Grisaille was done, at the Academy they recommend to do another layer, this time with lead white. I'm gonna explain you in a second.
So basically, this second layer is, not necessary in all cases, but since at the Academy they are advising to do it, I'm trying to do it. And this helps to push down the contrast of the first layer of Grisaille and create more range of values, basically. So to be able to give more, roundness to the things and more value range, basically. So that the color stage is gonna be the easiest one.
In general, this extra passage on the Grisaille helps a lot with softening those harder transitions. Old masters like Raphael used to do it. In this second layer, I covered the area I was gonna work with lead white, and while still wet, I went on with raw umber. Here you're not redoing the Grisaille in full, but it is important that you put the raw umber only on the areas that need more work, for example the darkest passages to find more volume. You don't have to redo the whole thing, otherwise we'd end up with the same contrast and the same problems. You cannot substitute lead white with titanium white. Lead white in fact is very transparent while titanium is very covering. If you do that with titanium, you're gonna lose the work you did before. Not sure about how zinc behaves because I've never tried it, but I guess that with its transparency it could be an okay substitute for the lead. With the second passage, the volumes are finally coming out and the figure looks much more sculpted than the more bidimensional one next to it, don't you think? You can do as many of these layers as you wish to reach the effect that you desire. In my case, I wish I had done at least one more, because the volumes weren't there quite yet, and as I said, I should have made some transitions way softer. And now the fun part, color glazing. With this method, we're only working with transparent or semi-transparent pigments. Earths like raw umber, burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, then Naples yellow, vermilion and lead white. And in this stage, we're adding a bit of oil to our solvent, and we're going to increase the proportion of oil as we build layer over layer, respecting the fat over lean rule. In the first stage, we're going to work on the large masses, and we're only going to have two color mixes. One for the shadows and one for the midtones. The recommended color for the shadow mass of the skin tone is just raw umber. Then we're gonna put burnt umber on the terminator to warm it up and darken it a bit. For the midtone instead, the skin tone will be a mix between burnt sienna, Naples yellow, vermilion and lead white. You can also put a touch of burnt umber to desaturate it a bit. Once you put the midtone mass, we can proceed working with the highlights within them, always wet on wet. You might understand that with these mixes, we're gonna have cooler shadows and warmer light, and even within them, there's gonna be an interesting interplay between temperatures. Remember, we're working transparently, so the Grisaille underneath is gonna do a lot of work for us when we put down the glaze uniformly. For this method, you should always have a very soft brush for blending away the brush strokes. A sable brush is recommended. When you'll put down the midtones, you'll see that the darker colors underneath will create some sort of grays. We'll call them the optical grays. They will help creating the volumes and turning the form. And this is almost all you need to know to complete your painting, because the logic is the same when we talk about glazing other objects in the scene that are not skin tone. Cooler shadows, warmer lights, and working in transparent layers. Also, there's no fixed number of layers. That will depend on the thickness of your glaze, on the correctness of your glaze, based on the result you want, and so on. On the faces, I personally had to put 3 or 4 glazes. Rumors say that Leonardo went up to 80 layers with Mona Lisa, and to him, it wasn't finished yet. Can you imagine? It took me a couple of glazes on the clothes and a couple on the other elements. It took me more time with the cards deck because, as I didn't do a very detailed Grisaille over there, I had to work on it without a precise drawing underneath, so I struggled a bit. There's gonna be 2 final glazes to do. One is a general glaze on all the shadows of the painting with raw umber, and I really mean all the shadows. Skin tone, hair, dresses, but also everything else. And this is to unify the tone and the mood of the painting and makes the shadows cooler. In the other glaze, we'll use lakes. Lakes are super transparent pigments like Indian yellow, alizarin crimson, sap green, together with ultramarine blue, to put the final color touches, like the red of the cheeks, the more yellow tone of the forehead, and so on. In my case, these really transform my painting. It will be possible to find the right tone just with these colors, but it will also be important to blend really well with your sable brush, because we're talking about very bright colors that at the end of this trick will leave just a trace of them, not the full bright color you'll see at the beginning. And since you made it up to this point of the video, I'm gonna give you one final trick to finish the painting. If you mix the lakes that I mentioned, so alizarin crimson, sap green and Indian yellow, with ultramarine blue, you can obtain a really deep black. Use that black in the accents of the painting, not in all the darkest part, not the masses, but only in the accent. They will really make a huge difference to make the painting pop. And with this, we got to the end of this video. It was just my first original painting and I still need to get to know better many of these steps, but for sure familiarizing with this method taught me a lot. What do you think? Did this video teach you something new? If so, I'd love to know in the comments. And I would also love to know, do you use a similar method? Don't forget to leave a like to the video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye!